Goal number 5 is adult literacy and lifelong learning, and the goal is that by the year 2000, every adult American will be literate and will possess the knowledge and skills necessary to compete in a global economy and exercise the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. I'll call first on Dr. Mark Music. Mark, we're glad to have you.
Thank you, Governor. On the adult literacy and lifelong learning goal, the resource group has put before you a number of measures for tracking progress on the goal and the 5 objectives. On 2 areas, your staff asked that we go in more detail. That was on the issue of international workforce skills and on the assessment of college graduates' ability to communicate effectively and solve problems and think critically. We've done that. The issue of international workforce skills comparisons is an important and complicated one. The issue of collegiate assessment is perhaps the stealth issue in our report and is likely to send shock waves and some controversy and debate on college campuses across America. Marc Tucker, a member of the resource group, chaired the technical planning subgroup that went into depth on both of these issues. And Mark, who is president of the National Center on Education and the Economy, will present our group's recommendations.
Thank you, Mark. Our technical subgroup was asked 2 straightforward questions. What would it take to make an accurate comparison of the skills of American workers to the skills of their counterparts in other countries? That was the first. And second, what would it take to assess what college graduates in this country know and are able to do? I'll start with the second. The second one, the origin of the second one, is the 5th objective under Goal 5, which, as you recall, says the proportion of college graduates who demonstrate an advanced ability to think critically, communicate effectively, and solve problems will increase substantially. As our technical subgroup looked at that challenge, if you will, it obviously, in the context of American education, is substantial. We start off with the observation that unlike the area of public elementary and secondary education, where there is, I think, an increasing consensus that there is some rough body of knowledge which everybody ought to know and master. To the contrary, in American higher education, we are faced with an enormous diversity of institutions, of programs, of purposes, and individual objectives and abilities. This is not one system, it is many. With that forceful fact in view, we came to the view rather quickly that it is neither necessary nor wise to create a single examination or any form, in fact, of single measure, the purpose of which would be to compare individuals or to compare institutions. So we advocate for you a somewhat more modest and, we believe, achievable purpose. Not easily achievable, by the way, but achievable. We are proposing to you a sample-based indicator, a set of sample-based indicators of the general outcomes of higher education. In effect, a NAEP-like system ratcheted up for higher education, in particular for our college system. In addition to the outcome indicators, that is to say, the indicators of what students know and are able to do, we would propose that the country collect a set of background data relating to the type of institution, the course of study, the characteristics of the individual student, and the student's entering ability level. Now, doing this would not capture the unique contributions of particular institutions, but what it would do is to provide us a brand new picture of the contribution of types of institutions and programs, and in particular, it would provide us with a picture of what students know and are able to do as a result of their college experience. We believe it's very important to strike a balance between measuring generic skills, such as critical thinking, and the mastery of particular subject matters, like, for example, mathematics. The issue, we believe, here is not technical. We have in NAEP, in effect, a technology for doing this kind of measurement. The real issue here is whether we can achieve a broad consensus, kind of consensus among, in particular, college educators that would enable us both to design and to carry out a program of assessment of this kind. Okay, let me turn now to the international assessment of workforce skills. I think, from my point of view at any rate, it is fair to say that to the extent that the entire national interest in knowing much more about student achievement has its origins in a rising national concern about national competitiveness, then this turns out to be a core issue. By this, I mean what our workers know compared to what workers in other countries know. Now, the central point here is that knowing what our kids know in school tells us less than we would like to know about what our workers know. It's not the same kind of knowledge, and they are not the same people. There's one research study after another that tells us that there is a pretty low correlation between performance in school and performance in life, and in particular performance at work. And that is because they are not the same skills. Critically important in my judgment as this area is, it is unusually tricky, even compared to the other tricky areas about which we have heard this afternoon. First of all, there is no existing instrument. There is no existing technology that we can take off the shelf that will enable us to make these comparisons. Second, we are talking about academic skills, and we are talking about a lot more than academic skills. This is a big package of skills that we are talking about, some of them very unlike others. Okay. The third point is this cannot be done just government to government, although you might think that's the way to do it. Get a bunch of governments around the table to decide what the form of the exam's going to be, and then do it. But here in the United States, as well as in other countries, we cannot, I assure you, we cannot expect our corporations to open their doors and say, you all come on in here and measure the skills of our workers. It is not going to work like that. Next problem is that the skills that are required to do various kinds of work depend on how that work is organized. And how work is organized differs greatly from one country, even from one firm, to the next. Lastly, in our view, doing this right and doing it well requires real international collaboration. The United States could unilaterally decide on what form of examination or test it wanted to carry out. If it did that, in our view, it would have a lot of trouble gaining the cooperation of other countries to whom we would be saying, in effect, hey, there's a whole lot we want to know about how our skills compare to yours. We want the right to come into your country, use our test, find it out, and leave. It is far more likely that we are going to get the information that we need if we do this collaboratively with other countries. That, again, adds a dimension of complexity to the task that those other tasks, which are essentially domestic, do not have. Okay. What are we recommending to you? One, that we organize this in the first instance as an international research project. There is a lot to be known, point one. Point two, we think that there's a lot to be gained by organizing this not as a necessarily government-to-government exchange, but rather as a collection, if you will, of research agencies among the countries that we want to engage in the conversation. We would begin with the kinds of skills that are tested by the National, Adult Literacy Survey, and move in progression to a set of skills over, of course, a number of years, which would end up giving us a much more complete picture of what we need to know. My point is, you don't need to do the whole thing at once. You can start more modestly and build up over time. Next, we're interested in developing a set of benchmark-level skills in occupational categories, and in effect defining what expert performance is in each. So we're not just telling you what people know, we are telling you what they know with respect to a benchmark world standard of performance. And we believe that it's very important not simply to measure what people know, but also to get a fix on how the workplace is organized in each of the countries that we are comparing ourselves to, because that will tell us a great deal about what the functional difference is that these skills make to competitive advantage. In our view, there is a very large design task ahead, and that is the place to begin if you agree with us that this is an important task for the country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Questions in this area? Let me just pose this one. You said if we're going to check, we'd have to have we'd have to collaborate with other governments, and it would be very difficult to do that. Is there not any type of means of assessment that could be in any way compared without going through that process?
I think we are not saying we should not collaborate with other governments, but simply that collaborating with other governments by itself is not going to get us where we want to go. So we're saying you could collaborate with other governments. You could view this as really a collaborative effort among research agencies in these different countries, and then you could combine that with government-to-government collaboration or not. Another possibility, by the way, for getting at least some of this information is through multinational firms that have operations in many countries, workers in each, and comparable job tasks. And so some of us, at any rate, think that we should be involving multinational firms in the design of this effort because they can obviously gain access to themselves in a way that is more difficult for anyone else. All those things need to be explored as in effect, strategies for getting the data that we need.
But in the world marketplace that we operate in, the multinationals would be probably the one common link that we would have.
That's right.
John Ashcroft.
I was interested in your statement that there's some studies that indicate that success in school doesn't really correlate much to success in life. And that strikes at the very heart of what we're talking about.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, you went over it rather glibly and with some speed. If that's been true in the past, I suspect it may not be as true in the future. And if indeed we're bent on educational performance as a means of becoming competitive, and if you suggest that really educational performance isn't linked to competitiveness, we might be rethinking some of what we're doing. Aside from that comment, could I get you to comment on the utility of the graduate record exams that are given to people who are leaving our institutions of higher education? I understand that you have said that there is a wide diversity of disciplines that characterize the curriculum that students focus on, but do these exams provide us with any indication about their achievement as it relates to the last of the objectives? And in the event that they don't, are they in any way related to these critical skills? In a sense, that last objective doesn't talk about any knowledge base that's developed at all.
Okay.
It just talks about the ability to think critically, communicate effectively, and solve problems.
Okay, let me actually, if I may, address at least quickly both your observation and your question. I am personally deeply committed to the view that the skills of the American people are a critical determinant of its competitive place in the world, and that education, in turn, is a critical determinant of the skills that you've got. I was making a narrower point. There's a lot of research, in fact, some of the analysis of the NAEP data shows very clearly that kids who do very well on a standardized test of arithmetic, that is to say they can add and subtract real well, when faced with the same problem put in the form of a bill at a restaurant and with the task of calculating what the tip is going to be and then adding that to the rest, can do the first brilliantly and fail miserably at the second. They can't take what they've learned in a school context and apply it, although you would think it is just the same knowledge that is required. It just ain't so. That is a simple to the point of simplistic example. In fact, it is much more complicated than that, because applying what you know in the context of laser-based measurement in a firm is not the direct translation of arithmetic skills to adding up a check. That's a much more complex thing. And so knowing whether our workers have the skills, if you like, the fundamental skills that are required to be a competent operator of laser-based measurement equipment is not the same thing as knowing what they've come out of high school with. That's really the point that I'm making here, and it's critically important to knowing how competitive we are. Okay, but I am with you 100%. Education contributes to skills. Skills are maybe the critical determinant ultimately of competitiveness. Okay, on the graduate record exam, that is, if I think I'm getting at the fundamental point that you're asking, we do think that it would be a great mistake for this country to look only at the generic skills, problem solving, critical thinking, and so on in college. And one reason for that is that if you look only, essentially what the research seems to indicate is that if you look only at those skills, what you end up measuring, in effect, is basic native intellectual ability. You are not looking very particularly at what the college itself has contributed to your capacity. What is essential, we think, is that we combine looking at how much and what kind of math you know, English, and so on, with your ability to use that knowledge to do critical thinking and problem solving.
Call on Governor By.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to compliment Marc Tucker for his presentation today and the work that he's done on our behalf, also for his very exciting work in the area of workforce development and the whole project of America's Choice, high skills or low wages. Mark, we're honored that you would be a part of our effort. I'd like to ask just a brief question. Most of the information that I've read suggests that America's system of higher education is fairly competitive, and that the segment of our society that we really need to focus in on is not so much our college graduates, although that is certainly a worthy undertaking, but those individuals who have not had the benefit of post-secondary higher education. And to the extent that that educational assessment process and workforce training and assessment go hand in hand, what we're really talking about is really something that the marketplace is involved in every day. I would like to ask my question just directly. Have the National Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, any of our national organizations involved with international commerce, competitiveness, trade, these sorts of things, have they done any useful groundwork here that perhaps could give us a running start toward really assessing our competitiveness and what is the marketplace when you get right down to it?
On the skills issue, I think not. Let me, however, let me start by saying thank you for what you said at the outset, but I'm not sure I accept the premise. That is, I think it is very clear that our postgraduate education system is viewed as virtually without peer in the world. I think it is equally clear that our very best colleges are viewed as among the best in the world. After that, however, I think nothing is clear. And in particular, I think it remains to be proven that, if you will, the bottom half of our higher education institutions are any better than the average high school in the rest of the world. A strong case can be made, in my view, that somewhere close to half of our higher education institutions are in fact the equivalent of high schools, not colleges, not higher education institutions, in much of the rest of the world. Now, unfortunately, whether I'm right about that or somebody else is right who believes that they are all first-class institutions is something we can know absolutely nothing about until we have some way of knowing how much these kids know and are able to do when they get out of college. And at the moment, we haven't got a clue.
And we appreciate very much the presentation. I'll leave with one comment on it. I was just looking at the results of the Harris poll on employers, and the way it read as to whether they had the ability to read and understand written and verbal instruction, it was a positive that yes, people did coming out of high school. As to whether they could do simple arithmetic, it was very close to 50-50. As to whether they had the skills to be applied, it was very close again. But the things that changed with the employers were that they have a real sense of dedication to work, and it was 70-29 percentage, and have a real discipline in work habits, and it was 67-33 no. So they were speaking that they had the ability to learn, they had the skills in some instances, at least a 50-50 basis, but it was 2 and 3 to 1 as to the discipline and going the other way, which says we go beyond the skill base, as you first said.